So there's a 22 billion hole left by the previous incumbents. Thanks very much.
It's tough times, we're not in a great situation. So they were sort of bigging it up and making people think it was going to be like the doomsday.
It's going to cost me more from a minimum wage.
Where does that money come from and how does that impact the business and then all the people that are employed by that business?
That has an implication. So actually, could less people be employed?
Have you got 22 billion? No, I don't. Hi there, my name is Kes. I am the founder and CEO of OurSecretLab. And over the next sort of 15 to 20 minutes, we're going to take a view on the recent and arguably most anticipated budget from the last 20 years, ideally and predominantly from a creative industries and personal point of view. On my left-hand side, Erin Walls, the CEO and founder of WW Creative, accountancy service for the creative industries, and Toby Reynolds, senior financial planner for Engage Financial Services, and for complete compliance and openness. We are both clients and suppliers for both of these two companies. Thanks so much. I know we turned it around very quickly, as is my way, lastminute.com. It's been a week now since the budget. Considering you both work in an industry where all of your clients will be looking to you to do the impossible and tell them what tomorrow looks like. Just out of interest, especially from a creative point of view, what did it look like for you before the budget last week? And now that you've had a week to sit on it, had some feedback from your clients and been able to sort of pass through some of the detail, what's your take on what it kind of all means?
I think on the build-up, like you said, it's been an anticipated budget. Everyone thought it was going to be massive. Labour's done their part of saying, it's tough times, we're not in a great situation. So they were sort of bigging it up and making people think it was going to be like the doomsday. And the actual budget isn't that bad. I mean, it's a budget. There's always things in there people take issue with, but it's not as dire as I think some people were expecting. So on the day it hit, I think most of the clients were a bit like, yeah, okay, not as awful as we were expecting. Also, some of the things that came in, like the increases to the rates of capital gains tax, for example, had already been sort of leaked. So people already were expecting that. So now it's just the things that we know are definitely happening. How does that impact me? What does that mean for my business? Employers' NI going up is the obvious one that people are asking about. So we're dealing with that calculations and what that means for people.
Yeah, just to follow on, I mean, what is it? It was 14 years since the last Labour budget. Labour came out and basically said, this is going to be painful, which creates a huge amount of hype. And a lot of speculation goes on. So to your point about capital gains tax, it could have been worse. Yeah, and people were talking about aligning it with income tax and so forth. And then looking at inheritance tax, looking at pensions, like there are lots of things that could have been a lot worse, and different pockets of people are going to feel like this was bad. Other people are going to say, this actually hasn't been either painful or, to certain sectors, do you know what, that's really good. So it really is very, very personal. But this, I think it is a political budget. A lot of the tax that is raised, actually some of those aren't big tax raises. But as far as the Labour Party are concerned, it's what needs to be seen to have changed. Okay,
so we've all heard of AI. Mine is II. It's intelligent ignorance. That's what I'm offering. So my headline as a confirmed Guardian sponsor and a reasonably liberal reader, according to my algorithm, understand that there was a 22 billion hole. I mean, I love these numbers, like as if it were like, have you got £5? Have you got 22 billion? No, I don't. So there's a 22 billion hole left by the previous incumbents. Thanks very much. There's some argument as to whether you didn't know that was there, you didn't know it was there, it came as a surprise, it doesn't come as a surprise. So that's where some of the language comes as concerns, we're going to have to fix it. So they fix it to the tune of 40 billion, which is what my sort of basic understanding of what this means. That's what this budget is designed to accumulate. But in terms of what you spoke about those specifics, obviously there will be a million different shades of grey. But in the basic, like who is fronting the fact that we're behind the sort of national curve, and this, this budget comes to fix that? Like, who's going to be paying?
Well, it's not necessarily a straightforward question. Like, it depends which of those areas that the budget is pulling in tax in, which of those affect your life. Obviously, if you're selling assets or exiting a business, there's more planning that needs to be done. If you've got employers and you pay employers NI, there's a definite hit there. But it's like all budgets. One, it's not a known. It's what they hope will happen, whether they get that money in or not. What we do in the year changes everything. So I think, like all budgets, they take with one hand, they give with another. You just have to see on a granular level how it impacts you and your life. But there's costs in there. People are going to see that inevitably.
From your perspective,
Yeah. So the immediate hole to be filled is NI contributions, obviously from an employer perspective, which is not insignificant. So that's where I think a lot of the tax is going to come from. Knock-on effects remain to be seen. But the other thing that seems to have changed quite significantly is probably more to do with the inheritance tax. But the reality is inheritance tax is arguably further down the line. So it's not necessarily an immediate tax that is going to get picked up.
2027?
Well, as far as pensions are concerned, falling into one's inheritance tax estate, exactly that. It is going to be 2027. There's a consultation that's going to come out, so that should be April 25. So not until then are we going to really know a little bit more about the substance and how they're going to do this.
Yeah, and if I could just jump back on the NI. So the employer's NI, the point at which an employer starts paying NI has dropped. So you're paying it quicker from April. And the amount that you pay at has gone from 13.8 up to 15%. So it looks automatically like it is definitely a big hit for everyone. And for larger employees, it definitely will be. But there is employment allowance for smaller businesses, which was at 5,000. It's now 10,100 or whatever. So that's doubled. So for some people, even though the headline figure is that employers' NI has gone up, actually some smaller employees won't feel that hit, at least not initially. It's more people who have got larger salaries to pay or more people to pay will see that hit inevitably. But they have tried to shield the smaller end of the market to a certain extent.
So, I mean, from a kind of, if I split it using intelligent ignorance to somebody who helps me protect and husband the money on the way in, and someone who sensibly then looks at what's available and helps me invest the money on the way out, from your perspective, what kind of discussions happened pre, but then, post? Do you feel like there's a reasonable definitive line in the sand here, or there are some warnings and therefore people have started to make decisions based upon what this has seen, even if it has, as you indicated before, it hasn't directly impacted them immediately?
Yes, and you might have to come back and just break that question up for me in a second.
Sure.
But as you know, and you said at the outset that your client, you'll know that we communicated to our clients. And fair enough, there was, as I said, a lot of speculation, and we don't really like talking to speculation. But I think we had to be aware that clients were receiving all of this information, and sometimes a bit of scaremongering. The headline news articles were coming out, oh, you're going to get done for this, that, and the other. And we had to sort of not rein it in, but just say, well, yes, okay, fine. If that happens, then what does that mean? A lot of people were concerned that actually had no particular reason to be concerned, just they thought they should be fearful. So it was about being on the front foot and just communicating, and then picking up with individuals where actually case by case they might be slightly more impacted. We've then had this budget, and I would suggest that in the vast majority it's about not making knee-jerk reactions. And again, so we've communicated out to say, right, these are the headline things. We will speak to you in time, and the way that we work is that we see clients on an annual basis, and it's before the end of the tax year. So there are lots of things that we can actually pick up with them in due course. And yes, we're 1 week after, as you've alluded to, but actually there's going to be a long time of now thinking, planning, these consultation papers coming in. So we're going to learn a lot more over time and work out, right, actually what is a particular structure. What has also changed with inheritance tax and pensions and so forth, it was perhaps an easier environment to say, yeah, this is your go-to, do this. And it would probably work for like a vast majority of people. The way that I think it's now changed is that it's going to be far more personal.
Well, let's maybe, as you said, maybe my question was a little bit nebulous. So let's try and break it down into the small component parts. If you look at it from, let's take small, medium, creative industries. We've spoken briefly off camera about what that looks like and some of the protections that have still remained. Can you speak to that in terms of, what kind of, impact, the last week has had, or the budget had upon that?
Yeah, so the creative sectors, creative industries have already had in place some creative tax credits. So there's R&D, which is available not just to creative sectors, to anyone who's doing R&D. There's been ongoing issues as to what classes as an R&D, what you might think as a normal person classes as innovation isn't necessarily what HMRC agree with. So that one's becoming harder for people to sort of tick off the boxes. But you've got film tax, animation, there's orchestras, there's video games, and in the budget they referred to keeping them in place and enhancing those, and special stuff for VFX, things like that. So the government is acknowledging the creative sectors and is trying to help in certain ways. So that's great. That's all protected and it's still there. But then all the other things that come in with the planning, with the changes to capital gains and employment taxes, all things like that are still going to hit those industries because they're employers, and so it's going to be a way up of how can you. Those industries are always volatile. There's always a struggle in those industries because they're project-based. So it's always like, oh, we're doing really well. Oh my God, there's nothing coming in tomorrow. So it's about trying to manage that landscape with the new changes and get the best out of what they can.
Yeah, and from your perspective, how does that work? Like, taking, for example, creative industries as an example, where there's that kind of, it's very cyclical. Like it's, there's not a steady stream of income. Sometimes you're doing very, very well. Sometimes, you're struggling in terms of pipeline and so on and so forth. Do you find that budgets of this nature change people's mindset on that? Or there's the kind of feeling of, even when they're as hyped as this one was, it arrives and everyone's like, we're kind of, we'll deal with it. But then the other side of that is, do you think that from a company side, there's an acceptance that it's a shared burden, or it's, I'm now getting hit in the pocket X, I therefore need to find prices Y, whether that's an increase in price or sharing that back in terms of a bonus at the end of the year and all the rest of it. So from your perspective, do you find that a budget of this nature affects people who don't have regular incomes and kind of what their mindset is on the amount they're putting away for futures and so on and so forth?
Maybe. I mean, what we do a lot of, and actually Erin and I were talking about this, is planning. We are financial planners and advisors. The whole point is we work with people who sometimes have very consistent and sort of regular incomes coming through, and we work with other people in other industries, and you're talking exactly about that, and there are some high highs and there are some low moments, and it's about trying to get that average and trying to help people work through those moments. So budgeting, and not spending everything now because it's the good times, expecting, there can be some bad times, and there will be. Markets are cyclical, lots of industries are cyclical. We can't forget that, and one should never forget it. And those who are experienced and have been there once or twice before will know that that's the case. Youngsters in industries, when it's going great, might just be, it's always going to be good times. And it's not the case. So actually just budgeting, helping people plan through the good times. When there's money available to be really tax efficient, great, make the most of it. Hey, while the sun is shining is sort of the expression there. It won't always be the case. But when those bad times come, and they will, and you don't know how long, well, you're sort of planning for them. Make sure there's cash available or access to cash maybe.
Yeah, I think some of the things that are going to come up as a result of the budget are obviously, hopefully most people have some sort of plan or budget they're working to. Obviously, I know lots of people in the creative sectors don't, because it's notoriously hard. Well, it's very hard to do it if you don't know, what your pipeline looks like. But there are decisions that will be made by employers as a result of what's happened in the budget, which will impact individuals, which they might not necessarily be thinking of. So, you know, if my employer's NI goes up, that automatically reduces the profitability of my company. So I'm now not as profitable next year as I thought I might be already. That's before there's changes to what clients come in, whatever. So I'm, as a business owner, thinking, well, what do I do about that? You know, do I increase my prices? Do I cut down the number of freelancers I use? Do I not increase salaries next year with the pot that I was expecting? Because actually some of that pot's now gone in NI. So there's lots of sort of other little conversations and thought processes that come off of the change, which isn't necessarily the direct change, which is the increase of that money. It's where does that money come from and how does that impact the business and then all the people that are employed by that business?
And in your experience, without it being definitive, obviously, is how long do you think before that kind of stuff manifests in terms of here's what we expected because this is what we needed, and here is the unfortunate or some of the sort of unspoken takeaways which have either not been as effective as possible, have kind of had a far greater negative impact. Obviously, I mean, there's the Liz Truss budget, mortgages go through the roof and everything else. There are some things that are, you know, very dynamically obvious. But, you know, speaking to that is, if you work in an uncertain industry where things are up and down, and then things of this nature happen, you know, is it literally the more plan, the better? Just by virtue, the faster you get to kind of understanding your situation and putting things in place, the better it is.
I think you're probably going to say the same thing, which is that just to have a plan is a good idea. And then when you have a plan, you have to always review the plan. You have to go back to it. So like we will reach out to clients in the next couple of weeks and say, you know, this is what we were planning on doing next year. This is how much your basic salary was going to be if you're a director of a small company. Well, now we've run the figures. Actually, that figure possibly shouldn't be that figure anymore. We think it should be this. And then they're going to say, oh, well, that means that I can't do that or I can do that. So it's about looking at the information and whatever plan there is, even if it's really basic things like how much was I going to pay myself next year, and trying to incorporate that information to make better decisions.
Yeah, the plan, without a doubt, evolves over time. As soon as you write the plan, it's going to change, and you think, well, as a client, well, why am I doing a plan? Because it's so much easier. Once you've got the plan, you've got the weight off your shoulders, and it's there, and then that can change and evolve over time. But Cass, what I thought was interesting was sort of how you started the question about this deficit and are there sort of unintended consequences? And I think the answer will be yes. You know, that it is a $22 billion question, and without a doubt they've tweaked something here and not meaning to. Without a doubt there will be change that goes on. Now, how long it actually takes for that to come about remains to be seen. There are certain things that have already changed. For instance, school fees, and fair enough, it's not all part of what we're talking about today, but there are already, you know, private schools, independent schools that have closed down because they are going to feel the pinch, which means therefore you've got children maybe going back into the state system, and then the state system has more burden and more pressure. That's an unintended consequence. It might be easily filled financially, remains to be seen, but there will be bigger pieces in this. You know, talk about employers now looking at, right, do I employ that extra person? It's going to cost me more from a minimum wage. It's going to cost me more from a national insurance, potentially. That has a implication. So actually, could less people be employed? You know, you're probably looking at, some people are looking at this going, great, you know, on a basic, I'm going to get paid more. My, you know, basic wage has gone up. This is all good. Well, yeah, but will that employer want to employ you for as many hours as they were previously? All big questions. Beneficiary of this might be technology. You know, we are already, technology is being used to make things more efficient. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, and that's, you know, the irony of sort of becoming more and more efficient, and, you know, having, you know, protective services to protect R&D and the creative services and the future that may well be undercutting the very individuals who will then not be paying tax because they don't have a job. Right. I mean, like I said, we, again, off camera, it feels like Black Mirror has become utterly redundant. Just just a couple of things that I'd written, talking specifically about tax saving from both perspectives. This really feels like it's a question for in and a question for out. Tax savings for freelancers. With some link to the budget as it's been. I know we spoke about a lot of freelancers are speaking, especially in the creative industries, that they're noticing that despite high profile productions on Amazon Prime and Netflix and things of that nature, that a lot of them are out of work a lot more of the time, even if when they are in work, I mean, it's the classic, I've got it, it's great, it's not great. That when they are in work, there is great production, but also that some of the things that you spoke about, that whether it's technology or the money being invested in post and effects, means that previously the good times would have been very good. Now they're okay and you're happy to have a 3-month contract or something of that nature, but it's not enough to then be out of work for 6 months.
Yeah.
So again, I speak from a position of ignorance on that, but in terms of planning and everything else, and seeing how this is working, what's your mindset? Just in terms of not necessarily exclusively your opinion, but what are people saying to you? What are their concerns, and what have you said in return?
I mean, it is tough, is what we're hearing. So I mean, if you look at what's happened, we had like Brexit, then we had COVID, we've had disastrous government issues to deal with, and then knowing there was going to be a big election in the States always stops people putting money in their pocket because they're waiting. So like film, TV, lots of the creative sectors have just had a rubbish time. And then you've got AI coming in, which although lots of people are finding ways to use it and work with it, lots of other people are finding they're just completely replaced. So larger companies can get in an AI prompt, and then they don't need necessarily a photographer. They don't need necessarily the same spend on copyrights or stuff like that. So some people are pivoting and finding new avenues. Creatives always find a way. But a lot of people are finding that their normal jobs are sort of falling away, or the amount that they can get is shrinking. So you've been in the industry many years, got loads of experience, you should be able to command a decent wage. But because of technology, loads of people are coming into the sector that don't necessarily have your years of experience, but can still deliver something on a par. It's tough. It is tough out there for sure. But there are good signs. The fact that the election is done is great. We have certainty there. We know what's coming. Well, we don't know what's coming, but you know what I mean. We know he's won it, and it will be his policies that roll out. If you're an investor, you can make a decision now, whether to invest or not invest, or which country, whatever. But at least you can make a decision. That means things start happening, which is really great news. The downside specifically for the creative sectors is that the Trump administration, at least last time, was not overly embracing of diversity, difference, culture, things like that. And those things are really important for growth in the creative sectors. So if they're sort of sidelined or not given the sort of scope that is required, then that might cause a problem over the term. But I mean, the now is that we've got some certainty. So hopefully the investment, which has been on sort of, everyone's been holding back, now people can make decisions which should see money filter in.
Yeah, and so from the conversation that you and I have had, on a couple of occasions, but it is an interesting one for me where, certain things that come into the public consciousness then become as if they were true, and therefore people act on them. So there was, post-COVID, it was, have you got a 3-month buffer or a 6-month buffer? This is what you need. It's almost like a mini sort of investment or wealth fund, as a sort of rainy day fund that exists before you try to max out your ISAs and so on and so forth. The absolute basics of simplistic investment knowledge, taking into account some of the things that Aaron has pointed to. Have you seen any change? Have you seen any difference? What does it feel like? Do people feel more like they still want to invest for a rainy day, but I need something I can have tomorrow, or are they still making decisions that feel long term?
I think we have to make decisions which are medium, long term, but at the same time recognise what's going on in the short term. And it just means that, as you allude to, right, so if you think that there's going to be a bigger gap between one job to the next, we'll stick this in the plan. Let's work it out. And sometimes it's going to be a case of cut your cloth to whatever the particular situation is. And that's not supposed to sound bad, because there will be those good times again. And as I said, if we can find sort of what an even medium is and where the needs are, and then you can provide above those needs over the medium to long term, brilliant. I think clients are going to be very happy with that. But we've got to just be very realistic. And unfortunately, we are really realistic and very honest with clients, and they need to be equally honest with us and just tell us what the situation is. And don't be fearful of saying, right, I don't think this next job's coming for another 3 months. And previously it was much sooner. Well, okay, fine. Great. Now that we know that, I know it's relatively short term, but we can start helping with that and plan towards it. And now we might need to build in some more flexibility with previous investments. And when you said, right, well, I can do pension contributions, well, maybe that's not the thing you should be doing, because that money is locked away for a period of time, depending on what sort of pension you're in. But let's create some flexibility elsewhere.
And so, I mean, obviously I've got 30 questions here, but just to sort of wrap it up at the end, are there any, apart from the sensible nature of making, hay while the sun shines, but also, it's not all just put away for, tomorrow and so on, or having a sense of balance. Is there anything that happened like last week with the budget and all the rest of it? And obviously we're filming on the day after, Donald Trump won the election, the things of that nature where you're like, I would tweak my own plan in terms of reference to how I speak to clients? Or is it just confirmation of you want to be as preloaded and pre-armed and, and kind of sensible but, a degree of flex, that comes from having, saved for a rainy day and all the rest of it will give you sort of more options?
Yeah, I mean, some of that's just common sense. Like if you can save some money, regardless of where you put it and where you're investing it, it always makes sense to do that. But yeah, I think anyone should be speaking to an IFA or an accountant or whatever, because there are changes. Like we're going to be telling clients to tweak some of the amounts they take out of the company. The dividends that you used to be able to take out £1,000 tax-free, that's now dropped to just 500. There are little things that people might not have picked up on, which will change how they interact with their business or their own finances. So I think everyone should be looking at their finances, and if they're not doing it alone or if they're not comfortable with it, they should be trying to speak to someone else to help them, for sure.
Yeah, it comes back to that plan. The plan's going to help without a doubt. With regards to things that have changed, actually some of the good stuff that came out of the budget was things didn't necessarily change. So, capital gains tax allowance, fair enough, it is £3,000, but they didn't scrap it altogether. Yeah. The Conservatives had already reduced it significantly down to where it is today. Lots of things about pensions haven't changed. So there's no NI on pension contributions. Okay, well, that's a bit of a saving. The lifetime allowance, or how much, there was talk that they might have changed lifetime allowance. Okay, so they haven't touched that. They haven't touched how much you can put into your pensions. There were lots of things that haven't been changed. So actually lots of parts of the planning or whatever people were doing previously actually can continue as they were. And I think maybe that's a bit of the positive. Mentioned about capital gains tax. Yeah, it's gone up, but it's not gone up so much that people won't now sell those assets and take gains, because that's the fear. If the taxes go up too much, it stops things happening altogether. Yeah.
So keep the plan. Don't
get a plan if you haven't got a plan.
Get a plan.
Review the plan.
Or speak to people who can help you get a plan. Consistently review the plan.
Yeah.
And like Dad's Army, don't panic. Understood. Erin, Toby, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.